They're expecting averaging estimates to be for this quarter 245.11 million for this earnings. Hi everyone, welcome to Wealthy Mindset. My name is Oliver. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Hope you guys are having a great day like always. And in today's video, I'm going to be covering BlackBerry stock for Q4 earnings in 2021, which is on March 30th at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time. This video is going to be jam-packed with a lot of information. I highly encourage you to watch it all the way to the end. And if you're new to the channel, I do have a video, which might sound crazy, but BlackBerry going to $180 a share one day in the future. If you're new to the channel and you haven't seen it, I highly encourage you to watch that. And I have a roadmap video in terms of price predictions as to like what milestones will be hit all the way up to that. And if you've seen both those videos and you're like, what happens if we miss this earnings? Like if this earnings does not hit, what will happen to that roadmap video that I've posted? Good question. So basically September will be affected, essentially move September to the end of the year, almost no matter what, I would say. So we'll see, but the $180 is still in play, in my opinion, all the way through. This just earnings, it's essentially BlackBerry's a long-term play, so I would not be too concerned about specifically this earnings. And from what I'm going to show you this video, is you're going to be, in my opinion, I think you're going to be extremely optimistic overall for BlackBerry. And then quick disclaimer before we begin, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not a professional. Everything I do share with you guys is just my opinion. It is not advice. So please do not buy or sell based off the information I give you or the opinions I do form. Please do your own due diligence and research before buying and selling. And I do own shares in BlackBerry, been holding for 6 years. So I'm a long-term investor overall. And keep in mind, be overcritical when you're watching these videos because I could hypothetically be too optimistic or a little bit too biased towards the whole entire video narrative, if that makes sense. Okay, so I'm going to break down this video in terms of a few sections. The first section is going to be an interview with John Chen. That was 6 months ago, elaborating on this earnings, potentially maybe next earnings, and I'm going to elaborate more on that. I'm going to play the video relatively soon. Then I'm going to talk about the patents in terms of lawsuit, in terms of the patents sold. Then I'm going to talk about the estimates in terms of what the street is expecting, what they might hit. And then I'm going to talk about a couple of comparisons and then graph analysis towards the end, but not an in-depth dive that I usually do in terms of graph analysis. Okay, so I'm going to play the clip right now for the interview with John Chen. This was back in September 24th, 2020. You can see where my cursor is. It was so roughly about 6 months ago in a week, give or take. And he basically explains almost essentially this earnings coming up or the next earnings after. So I'm going to elaborate more on the video after that. So I'm going to play the clip right now.
Because you've joined us in the past. I mean, you guys made a big bet in the acquisition of Cylance. It was a huge transaction for you. What's been interesting, I think, for a lot of people in the markets, and John, you know this story well, I mean, there are rival players out there. We saw IPOs, for example, at least one of your very well-known rivals that, got a lot of attention from investors, whereas I think for investors in BlackBerry, we have not seen that same response to technology as a technology stock or a security play. What's been your reaction to that?
That's a good question. We bought Cylance because of one piece of technology is very important to us, which is the endpoint protection technology. We bought something, and they were very famous for doing something called the endpoint prediction, protection prediction. So most people call it EPP technology. So we bought that technology because we need to enable that into, well that we do well in the automobile industry, for example, a car and edge computing. That's very important for us to be able to secure that particular endpoint. So we bought Cylance to make that bet strategically for that particular reason. And then, but the market is very much focused on EDR market, which is the detect and remediation market, which is one you were talking about, a competitor of mine is getting all the attention. We have since caught up with that. We caught up with that now. We have a cloud version coming out in the next 3 to 6 months. So there's been a lot of work being done to combine our EPP technology, which we're the #1 in the world, with the EDR technology, which we have it today. So, and we take it a level higher to address the enterprise using a technology platform called Spark. But anyway, before I confuse anybody, the simple answer to your question is we weren't ready to intercept the market, where my competitors they can't do much on EPP. They do well in EDR, and they were able to take advantage of that. But that's no more true anymore. I mean, it's no longer true. You see us growing very well next year in a combined space of the cyber.
So I'm going to quickly recap what John Chen stated, saying that they bought Cylance specifically for the AI cybersecurity side to integrate with the autonomous vehicles. That's way more bigger of a market than what the competitors are doing in terms of the cybersecurity side. But he stated that they're still going to go after that right now. In the next 3 months to 6 months, which right now is the 6-month mark, we should start seeing a reflection of that taking market share from competitors. He didn't specifically say that right now in this interview. There was another interview that he basically stated that I believe it was a 3-month-old video, not a 6-month-old video. But I will be posting that in the $180 price target video in the part 2. But in the meantime, just because I couldn't find it, by the way, that's why. But I will find it and I'll post it in that video. But in the meantime, hopefully that does happen in this earnings report. The only thing is, though, it could be pushed into the next earnings report, and I'll explain why further. But in the meantime, in terms of total revenue that was mentioned by CrowdStrike, this is, I guess I can't zoom down, but this is from CrowdStrike. Their total revenue was $264.9 million, which is in the ballpark of what BlackBerry earns per quarter. This is quarterly, by the way. The only difference is, this is the thing. So they are growing because past quarter, the same time frame in Q4, they earned $152 million, which is less than what BlackBerry earns overall. But in terms of growth, it's a massive growth. That's the thing. People see growth as a potential, but their market cap is ridiculous though. Their market cap at the moment, I believe right now, is about $39 billion. And then BlackBerry is at what? I think it's probably at like 7 to 8 billion or something. Like, let's just say 8 billion. So I probably should have looked that up. But either way, so it's like, where's that disconnect? The problem is essentially they see that growth. The only thing is the cybersecurity side. If you don't talk about the autonomous vehicle side, what John Chen is going after, just the cybersecurity side, the year-over-year growth is anywhere between 10 to 15, maybe sometimes 20% year-over-year growth. So over time, right now they got 74% increase. Well, the problem is they're entering BlackBerry territory, which is about a $1 billion market cap for the year, or not market cap, $1 billion revenue growth for a year. And it gets harder and harder to grow, right? So like I've mentioned in the past videos, to go from $100 million per year growth to, let's just say, $200 million a year growth, yeah, that's a big task. You're 100% growth right there. But to go from 1 billion to 2 billion is a lot harder to grow as a company. So that's why I'm thinking essentially it's easy to go from 152 million to 264 million, but it's a lot harder to go from 264 to like 500 million, let's just say. That's my personal opinion. Again, I'm not a financial professional, but especially when you get into the billions, it gets a lot harder to grow. So right now they're seeing this massive growth. I think essentially will slow down, especially since John Chen stated that they'll be taking market share sooner or later, and they essentially do it better. So that's what I'm trying to mention. Now, the reason why I think it might be pushed to the next earnings is because essentially this pandemic is just the way it's going on. It's taking a longer time to just kickstart back to full throttle and going to what we used to do. And essentially we have also a chip shortage that I've mentioned in the past, that other automakers are shutting down that I've mentioned, but we're getting more automakers shutting down because of this chip shortage. And the reason why I'm mentioning it, like for example, Ford is saying that they're going to lose $2.5 billion in revenue estimated because of this hit. But I wouldn't be too concerned, is because the revenues are 127 billion, and then their profits is about 14 billion. So 2.5 billion is not a small amount. But I wouldn't be too concerned of overall this, because their debt is 164 billion. I've talked about Ford in the past, but essentially for the automakers, 2.5 billion is a lot, but it's not a massive hit. I'm more concerned about what this chip shortage is performing. So because there's a low supply and demand's high, when it comes to the autonomous vehicle side, they need more chips than anything, I would say, in my opinion. And because of that, it's going to increase cost, right? And yes, research and development already has like a cost buffer in place, but it could technically slow down things, because if they see that automakers are essentially losing a little bit of money. They might slow down in terms of investments. So then there might be other investments that are slowed down. And BlackBerry, essentially we want BlackBerry to pick up on this revenue, right? So in terms of the overall auto industry, in terms of autonomous vehicles and all that stuff, I don't think it's going to impact that dramatically. But for BlackBerry, again, it might hit BlackBerry a little bit more harder than others just because we want to see that revenue growth come in a lot quicker. Now, if we see that revenue growth come in from the cybersecurity side, from the competitors and all that stuff, then that's another positive. But the main growth is going to be coming from this vehicle side. That's what I'm looking for. And that's, yes, going to come along the lines later. I just don't want to see massive delays, that's all. Okay, so now if we go to the patents lawsuit in terms of Facebook versus BlackBerry, this was in California, Oakland division. This was basically an order. It was proposed at first, then it became an order, and it was filed, or technically initiated by the court on December 15th, and it had 30 days to settle. So right here, now therefore, hereby, etc., has to be basically approved, and the settlement amount has to be approved by January 15th, 2021. I just want to quickly say something. Definitely know what you own and make sure you do your due diligence and research, because if you remember what I've covered before in the Jim Cramer video in terms of hedge funds, in terms of misinformation sometimes, gray areas and all that stuff, I'll probably have the video come up here or something like that, essentially stating that sometimes analysts misstate things. For example, the RBC analyst at that time stated that the settlement could have potentially been in the Q3 earnings already, because it came out a few days before it was reported. So Q3 was reported on December 17th, 2020, and this technically could have been settled on December 15th. What I'm going to show you right now to show that that was misleading, again, I'm not a financial professional, but I think this pretty much shows it. So if we go right about here, this is the BlackBerry investor webpage. By the way, I know this is for future projections. This is for 2022, but the timing, these are estimates, and these are supposed to technically hold at least pretty close to each other, right? So if Q3, which was, oh, sorry about that, I should have probably showed this. So if Q3 ends at November 30th and they reported on December 17th, then there is no way that the Facebook settlement could have been even included on the Q3 earnings. So that's why I say all the time, do your own due diligence and research. If the stock seems to be going down and you can't find a reason at all, then I would not necessarily panic. But I would panic maybe you can't find something. Definitely look even harder. But if it's just going down for no reason, then I would not panic sell in my opinion. Now, but if it's going down for a reason and you find it, then yes, sell if you think that's a valid reason. And like so on and so forth. So some people might have, because on that day it did go down when that analyst released that, I think it was a reinstated analysis too. It wasn't even a new analysis. There's a reason why I'm bringing up the Facebook stuff. It's not just to talk about analysts and all that stuff. So they had to settle on January 15th. Yes, they could have settled sooner. They could have essentially settled January 15th at the latest. This was a court order, etc., all that stuff. And I'm going to link this down below if you want to check it out. Now, the reason why I'm stating that, though, is to show that somehow, even though they're not supposed to disclose it, the agreement between BlackBerry and Facebook is not to, they're not allowed to disclose it. That's why you haven't heard anything about the amounts and all that stuff. But the reason why I want to mention is for Q4, it's supposed to include numbers from December 1st to February 28th. And if that's the case, December 15th and January 15th falls in Q4. So since they're not going to disclose it, and essentially what I'm thinking is they can't hold, so there's a play that they could do. They could essentially have patent licensing, like recurring revenue paid in the duration of the whole entire time. And Facebook still seems to be using these patents, so it'd be continuous revenue generating patent licensing deal kind of stuff. The only thing is though, they've used it in the past, so there has to be a lump sum somehow. And they could push it off a little bit into the future to agree to disclose. And maybe Facebook could have agreed to be like, you know what, we'll pay you a little bit extra to help not disclose this. So they would like have a small portion right now and like a bigger portion later in the future. So that way it doesn't look like it's completely from the Facebook settlement. The only thing is though, in my opinion, I don't think that they push too much into the future, just because if they push too much in business sense, I've only taken one quick business intro 101 class kind of stuff, but essentially they say money today is worth more money than in the future. So in a business sense, and I just know business 101 only, like an intro class, is I would not assume that they would want to push too much into the future. So either Facebook would up the ante in terms of having more money paid in the future if they want to not disclose it, or BlackBerry would be like, I'm sorry, unless you want to pay a little bit extra, you would have to accept the money now than later, because obviously that's the way business is. And again, money now is worth way more than money in the future. So I think essentially we would see some kind of numbers now, unless Facebook ends up paying way more. And another thing is too, some people might be saying, and that analyst stated too, was like, well, like, you know how like last time when I covered it, and like, again, definitely watch that Jim Cramer video. I think it's my second video I ever posted in this channel. But essentially, the analyst stated that it could have already been in terms of earnings, and I explained how it was like, yes, in the gray area. He's essentially saying that the payment, that settlement was a low amount, that we just missed it because it was such a low amount. Well, John Chen does not go after lawsuit. Like, he already states, he goes after lawsuits to do justice for the shareholders, and they're not going after lawsuits for just willy-nilly stuff, right? We saw that the Qualcomm settlement was about $840 million or something like that. Definitely don't quote me. Definitely look that up. Do your due diligence and research. But they're not essentially going after small things. So it definitely had to be a good amount. It looks like it has to be reoccurring, because I don't think I saw them stop. Essentially, like for example, one of the patents, just one out of the 6 patents, I believe, was that timestamp read or delivered. That's BlackBerry's patent. So that's one of the things, and I think they still show that. Again, you could double check easily by yourself. Just send a message and double check by that. So there's that for the patent lawsuit between Facebook and BlackBerry. Now, if we go to the patents that were sold, this is as of January 14th, 2021. It was already approved by the Canadian government. They sold 90 patents to Huawei in terms of cell phone tech, stuff like that. They stated that it was not important to them because they're not concerned until they're getting to the cell phone market again. They're more concerned about autonomous vehicles. They didn't state that specifically towards the end about the autonomous vehicles side, but essentially they're saying that what they stated was they're not necessarily concerned about the cell phone side, so these patents were not important to them. Now, the only thing is, though, just because it was not important to them doesn't mean that these patents are worth less. They're obviously worth more to people who are in the cell phone industry. So Huawei is in the cell phone market, and it could be worth a great ordeal to them. And obviously, being business people, John Chen and all stuff, they're not going to sell it to what it's worth to them. They will sell it to what it's worth into the market and what it's worth to the people buying it. So we will be seeing that. Again, this was in January 14th, 2021, already approved, all that stuff. And if we go back to the timing, that includes it in between this Q4. So we should see some kind of portion into it in terms of the Q4 earnings report. So there's that. So we got the Facebook side, we got the Huawei patents sold, we got the in terms of market share from competitors, we could see it in this earnings. So overall, this seems to be generally pretty good in my opinion. Now, the only thing is though, if we go to what the earnings, so for this earnings, what the analysts are expecting, the Wall Street kind of side, they're expecting averaging estimates to be for this quarter $245.11 million for this earnings. In terms of low estimates, it's $242 million. In terms of high estimates, $246.43 million. In terms of revenue, this is all revenue. Now, the reason why I'm talking about revenue and not earnings per share and all that stuff is because the one thing that BlackBerry keeps getting dinged on is revenue. This is just only from 4 analysts, by the way. It's not from like a massive list. The only problem is, even if they beat earnings right now, so you're going to be like, oh, that's not too bad. I think from looking in the past earnings reports and all that stuff from BlackBerry, you could be like, well, I think they'll beat this earnings. It's not too bad. It's not a big task to beat. The only problem is, even if they beat it, I could hear the analysts saying declining revenues, because last year, same time, their quarterly report earnings was $291 million. If they get any lower than $291 million, they're going to be like, well, year over year, that's a decline. Their revenues is not growing, et cetera, et cetera. So the only thing is, though, keep in mind, this revenue earnings was pre-pandemic, right? So technically, analysts could technically take it easy on the company and be like, well, that was pre-pandemic, because this was not pre-pandemic exactly, but it was just at the end. So, or like just at the brink of the beginning. So I don't think necessarily they were hit that badly to be affecting this number. Essentially, if it did, it was probably just about 9 million in max, in my opinion. So there's that. But essentially, or it could have been a little bit more, because it depends, because this ends at February 28th, right? So there was wind about it at the end of December, beginning of January. So I don't know if things slow down production in anticipation of essentially something could be happening. But again, either way, the problem is the way analysts have been working is anytime something happens bad, they just pretty much ding BlackBerry no matter what. I guess it is what it is. It's business. So people have to look at strictly numbers. So if you're looking at strictly numbers, if we go past 291 million, oof, in my opinion, this stock would go up dramatically. Unless if somehow, again, I'm not a professional. Analysts go through quarterly report earnings. And by the way, it should be released at 5 p.m. tomorrow. So I'll be looking through it. I'm, again, not a professional, but the analysts that are professionals will be going through this like what is it called? Comb through fine hair kind of stuff. And they might find something more if we pass this. But to me, if revenue is past 291 million, that is an amazing sign. If it's past these estimates, yes, it's a good sign, but I already know automatically analysts are going to ding it and say, well, year over year, it's a decline. There's no revenue growth, et cetera, because these are just estimates. So if we pass 291 million in terms of revenue, that is an amazing sign. I think it's going to be awesome. Now, are we going to pass it? In my opinion, yes, I think so. Except there's one thing I want to show you. So I'm going to be a little bit biased here and like a little too optimistic. I'm just going to like put a clear disclaimer. Again, definitely be critical throughout the whole entire video, but specifically this part, I'm just want to be like completely transparent. I think it might be a little bit too optimistic. We have the Facebook settlement, like I stated, the patents that are sold, the revenue that potentially could be garnered, like taken from competitors. Except the only thing is though, technically CrowdStrike's revenue has gone up. So it's like, how much did it take? Probably not much. Maybe there's new clients, et cetera, et cetera. Cybersecurity is definitely growing, by the way. Keep that in mind though, because people are being more and more exposed to there is hackers out there, and I'll explain in the future video, but there are infrastructures that are not built for cyber attacks, so that they're more vulnerable. But I'll elaborate more on that. The only thing is though, so going through all that stuff, this is the thing that's kind of like iffy. So if I go to the Q3 of last year, so if you go to Q3 to Q4 of last year, in terms of revenue, I'll open it up right now. In terms of, so here's Q3. So this is the December, for example, the December 17th report we had. This would be December 20th, 2019, right? It was $280 million revenue for that quarter. But if you go to Q4, which is right now, March 30, well, not right now, but last year, same time, March 31st, 2020, its revenue for Q4 was $291 million. The problem is the growth was roughly about only 11 million in terms of from that Q3 quarter to Q4 quarter, about 11 million, right? Then if you go to right now, Q3 of the one we just had, December 17th, 2020, we had 224 million revenue. So if you add about roughly 11 million, you're looking at 235 million. So the only problem is technically, hypothetically, because they got dinged pretty badly in the last quarter, if you hypothetically count the year over year and all that stuff, et cetera, et cetera. So if you're looking at that and you're looking at the estimates, then it would be a miss. Hypothetically, I'm not expecting a miss, but you would expect they're going to get 235 million in terms of revenue. So then if that's the case, then there'll be a miss and then the stock would go down and all that stuff. Now, the question is, how low will it go? Well, it depends. Like, I covered more in the last video, and I think those will be in play. If it misses, I'll be covering it way more in a future video because it'll be a lot easier to cover it too. But for tomorrow, I think because tomorrow is March 30th, today's March 29th, in the morning and all stuff, I think we're still going to end up going lower before the earnings gets released at 5:30 p.m. after the bell and all stuff, because we have a downward trend resistance line right here. I know it's not the cleanest, but I can't remember. I think we're in the algorithmic view right now, but this is just for just quick visualization. But we have a downward trend resistance line right here. We have another downward trend resistance line. So, and this downward trend resistance line dates back since March 15th, right? So I think we'll still end up going lower. I think we might, from what I saw, again, I go way more in depth than yet the last video I posted, but essentially it looks like hopefully we hover around just above $9 tomorrow and bounce back up, or $8.98. Worst case scenario, hopefully I'm anticipating for tomorrow. Yes, I stated 850, 856, 852, or 851 in the last video. I can't remember exactly, but I'm hoping that the lowest we go tomorrow, if we break through 898 or $9 price point, then I'm hoping that the lowest is 882. That's what I'm hoping for. But again, anything is possible. I'm not a professional. Nobody knows for sure. So take everything with a grain of salt. But definitely watch the latest video I posted, and then I'll keep you guys posted after earnings if anything dramatic happens. But I'm anticipating, could be a little bit too optimistic, that it's going to be a beat. I'm going to reverse to the upside. If we go down, I'll be covering it like always. Definitely can encourage you to subscribe so you can be notified when I do upload that video and all the other videos. But that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you guys do like videos like these in terms of stocks and other stock videos, credit scores, mortgages, financial freedom, passive income, definitely encourage you to subscribe so you'll be notified when I do upload those videos. And if you do like the video, consider dropping a like. It does help the channel. Thank you so much. And if you have any questions, do not hesitate to ask. I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. And that's pretty much it. Thanks again for awesome support, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.